Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the council briefing. I've got the microphone issue again, the speaker issue. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, have the echo. Sorry? I can hear it coming from the back. Can I continue, or is that very difficult for you to understand what I'm saying with echo? Yep. You can't understand? You can, okay, all right, great, thanks. So I'd like to start by acknowledging we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Just noting that Councillor Gontaszewski is running a little late. In addition to echoes this evening, if you detect a slightly off smell, we seem to have some pipe issues, and I do apologise. We tried to flush out the building, so hopefully that's not too noticeable this evening. I'd now like to open public question time and welcome you all to the meeting. This is your opportunity to come forward and ask questions or make a statement. We do just ask that you state your name, the address, the suburb in which you live, and if you could state the item number that you're speaking to. And we do allow up to 3 minutes. Please come forward. No set order. Has received any declarations of interest?
Yes, through you, Americole, I've received 2 declarations, impartiality declarations of interest from Councillor Gontaszewski in relation to item 5.2, the disclosure being that Councillor Gontaszewski is friends with Joe Chindarsi, who is the Director of Chindarsi Architects, the applicant for this item. The second declaration from Councillor Gontaszewski is in relation to item 5.5, 514 to 516 William Street, Highgate. Councillor Gontaszewski's declaration is that her children attended the same primary school as the children of the owners of the neighbouring property to the development. I've received 2 declarations of interest from Councillor Toppelberg. The first in relation to item 8.4, the right-of-way acquisition, the disclosure being that a family member owns and resides at a property adjacent to a portion of the right-of-way in question. The second declaration of interest is a proximity interest in relation to item 5.8. Councillor Toppelberg declares that his primary residence is within the area under consideration in the proposed scheme amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. So we'll take questions first on item 5.5, which is number 514 to 516 William Street, Highgate, proposed 4 grouped dwellings. Councillors. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. This matter was addressed by the architect from the gallery, but given that I believe we're still not public streaming question time, I'm going to ask it just so that it's on the record. I note that the building to the boundary wall along the southern boundary will lead to building right up to an existing window of the neighbouring residence, and that will remove the only source of, the only window within that room within the home. If I could just get some commentary in relation to that, and then also in relation to and just also get some confirmation in relation to what mechanisms or vehicles could be utilised in order to formalise the verbal agreement that has been said that has been made in relation to the provision of a skylight in that residence.
Through you, Americole, there is a boundary wall proposed, and it would ultimately result in a window to the ensuite bathroom of the adjoining property being blocked from sunlight access. That window is not operable. The proposal itself with the boundary walls is compliant with building height and also overshadowing complies with the proposal as well. So on that basis, there would be no requirement to set back that boundary wall, and that window is to a bathroom being a non-major opening because it's not a habitable room. So from a planning perspective, there is no planning requirement or deemed to comply standard that is being departed from. So my advice is that planning decision, a condition of approval, wouldn't be the appropriate approach to address that matter. More appropriately, as has been pursued, is a discussion and agreement between the two landowners, because ultimately it is a civil matter.
Thank you. So I might ask a similar question at the meeting next week, just to confirm that those discussions are ongoing. That would be great. Thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. It's a bit of a coincidence that the owner of 21 Harley Street's here, so in no way have I spoken to Kim before this, but I was just considering that because that particular property is on the city's municipal heritage inventory, whether there had been discussions about the requirement for the applicant to complete a dilapidation or PCR property condition report prior to and after completion. Just want to get some indication on that.
Through you, Americole, I will confirm. However, I don't believe a dilapidation report has been prepared at this stage. It hasn't been recommended as a condition of approval. Ultimately, dilapidation reports are typically prepared when there are extensive developments and could result in undermining or damaging adjoining properties. Now, it would be in the best interest of the developer to undertake one, but however, that has not been included as a condition of approval. Just on 21 Harley Street, you will notice that there is a section in the officer report that details the heritage management considerations and why the proposal is considered to be acceptable in respect to 21 Harley Street.
Just on for that, would it be unusual or normal for us to actually place that as a condition?
Through you, Mayor Cole, ultimately, again, it would be for more larger scale developments that we'd be imposing that condition to mandate preparing a dilapidation report.
And through you, Mayor, just want to get the comments regarding what came from front gallery with regards to the canopy cover at the rear, considering the plans that we've got, whether that's at all possible.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there is a departure to canopy coverage, if that's what you're alluding to. That is covered in the officer report. It is a matter for due regard through the city's built form policy. Ultimately, it's considered that it is an appropriate outcome. The provision of the canopy coverage is within the front setback area, as well as towards the rear. In addition to that, there is on-structure planting as well, which assists with softening the appearance of the building as viewed from the street and adjoining properties. Ultimately, there is also a surplus of deep soil zone provided on site, and that administration considers may be an opportunity to explore better selection of maybe tree species, and that's been imposed as a condition of planning approval so as we can maximise the amount of canopy coverage that can be provided on site.
And just through you, Mayor, just the question that came with the rear window either being frosted or raised to the 170.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the rear outlook is compliant with visual privacy requirements and minimum setbacks. It is across the right-of-way. ultimately, that does not result in a departure to the deemed to comply standard and is consistent with the requirements set out under the R code. So, again, from a planning perspective, that would need to be over and above what is actually required through the planning policy requirements.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Americole. Just a question. First of all, as part of the briefing notes, can we get higher resolution plans? Because you can't read anything when you actually zoom in. It's quite difficult in the plans that have been made available to us. I've just got a question in relation to bin stores and rubbish collection. I can't see the bin stores. Are they proposed? So if you look at the imagery that we've got shows open fencing right the way across the front of the property in the 3D imagery, but from what I can see, there are sections that either say the word bins or services or something that sit at the front of each of the properties. Is it intended that the bin store will be at the front of the property adjacent to the street?
Through Mayor Cole, that is correct. Those bin store locations are adjacent to the street. That will be screened by a street wall, and that does appear as a discussion point in the officer report as well.
Okay, and those bin stores are large enough to take three bins at the size that the city is planning on issuing as of right?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, it can accommodate FOGO.
Okay, and just there was the question in relation to the kitchenettes that I assume appeared in a previous version of the plans, but there are no kitchenettes shown in the dwellings or the portions of the dwelling that are above the garage. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, yes. In previous iterations, there were additional facilities provided in that rear building.
And the room that's designated as multi-purpose, because it's set back greater than 7.5 metres from the rear boundary, there's no change, regardless of what the purpose of that room was, it would comply with the visual privacy requirements of the R codes, irrespective of the goings-on in the multi-purpose room. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. The 7.5 metres is a deemed to comply requirement, and ultimately if it's a habitable space, then it needs to satisfy that setback requirement.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the calculation of the tree canopy coverage, the plans show a number of overlapping trees that are sort of basically growing into each other. In that calculation, does that take away, is it not double dipping on the coverage there? Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is my understanding. I will confirm in the briefing notes, however, that they aren't double dipping in saying that any of the canopy overhanging the property boundaries to the street or to the adjoining properties also hasn't been included, but I'll confirm that in the briefing notes.
The plans showed 2 verge trees. I'm not certain on this, but I don't think there are any verge trees in front of those 3 developments. Is that correct? Or
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm of the understanding that there are 2 verge trees existing.
and the development, if you look at the first band of trees, shows about 8 trees in a row across in front of across the development. If you were to plant additional trees into the verge, how many trees could you fit in that verge?
Through you, Mayor Cole, take that on notice and confirm that.
And can I foreshadow an amendment to request additional trees planted into the verge as well?
Councillors, questions? Have you finished, Councillor Loden? Yes. Manager, I just wanted to ask, in terms of the, so I'm using the CEO's iPad here because mine is not responding. Just in terms of the boundary to boundary on the north and south, and if you look at the diagram that shows it in the street context, and with it being built up to the boundary of the house on the south, I know you've just answered the question from Councillor Gondaszewski about that being compliant, but was there any consideration given to the fact that there has been that discretion is being sought over height, and whether that the height plus the boundary to boundary does start to have an impact on the existing houses within the street?
Through you, Mayor Cole, ultimately bulk and scale and also the rhythm in terms of the lot configuration and width was a key consideration throughout the assessment process, as well as consideration by the city's DRP. It needs to be a view needs to be formed in terms of whether that directly of that boundary wall itself is the determining factor as to whether it is or is not an appropriate outcome. It was considered that the height itself, when considered on its own merits, is appropriate. Now, it wasn't considered that the boundary wall itself would impact on the acceptability of that height component. Ultimately, they are permitted to build to that boundary, and that's what they have pursued. It's not over height, and it abuts an existing boundary wall. So on that basis, it was considered to be appropriate.
Okay, and just in relation to the request around whether there could be further canopy at the rear, I understand that that is really about softening the bulk and scale from the rear. Is that something that could be explored by the applicant, or is that a walking thoroughfare through that back section?
To clarify, Mayor Cole, are you referring to the rear of the site where it is adjacent to the right-of-way? Yes?
Yes.
3 trees?
That's correct.
Ultimately, that's required to be set back. The building is required to be set back because of future right-of-way widening, and the applicant has sought to provide those 3 trees within that setback area, accounting for the fact that the right-of-way is to provide that vehicular access, so there is no opportunity to provide additional trees within that space, accounting for the fact that they need to set back the building from that right-of-way.
Okay, and whilst the request from the neighbour at the rear, Mr Hughes, who's spoken this evening, it is about a compliant window, but a request to go a little further. Would that be put to the applicant for consideration, given that the neighbour has requested it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, happy to do so.
And just finally, I might have zoned out while I was having technical difficulties. Can we just confirm about the kitchenette situation and the potential for ancillary dwellings?
Yep, through you, Mayor Cole. Ultimately, what's been proposed are 4 group dwellings. Now, in each of those dwellings, there are 2 buildings, and they are both, I guess, used in conjunction with one another. If there was to be modifications to the rear building, as speculated, including kitchenette, and if they were to install a laundry and such, those are particular facilities which would qualify that building to the rear to be an ancillary dwelling, as it can be used independently from the dwelling to the front. On that basis, it changes the use of that particular building, and an ancillary dwelling, the requirements under the R codes, the deemed to comply standards, there's a number of provisions, including the lot must not be smaller than 450 square metres, so that in itself, it doesn't comply. On that basis, because it doesn't comply with the deemed to comply standards, they would not be exempt from development approval. They would need to seek development approval, otherwise they'd be in contravention of their approval and the Planning and Development Act. So that's ultimately what they would be seeking approval for, a group dwelling, and that's what we would be stamping approved on if it was to be supported by or approved by council. But any non-compliance would be a separate matter and subject to separate compliance action.
Thank you. So just in summary, if it were to become an ancillary dwelling, it would first require planning approval. Thank you. Are there any... Yes, Councillor Gondaszewski.
I may well have zoned out myself for a second. Just in relation to the question from the gallery, as to how a council would, I guess, is there a proactive mechanism to check for compliance, or would the assessment of would there be something that would need to be brought forward as a complaint from the community in terms of should there be some sort of, I guess, unapproved building works that resulted in an ancillary dwelling and therefore a separate short-term accommodation style development?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in short, it would be the latter. It's complaints driven. Ultimately, it's very challenging to monitor what happens internal of a building and any modifications that will be undertaken. So it would be complaints driven.
Councillors, any further questions? Also, just to say I welcome the addition of the DRP review table. That was a nice new addition to the report. Thank you. Okay, we'll now go sequentially through the remainder of the items on the agenda this evening. Just to note that item 5.1, number 12 Newcastle Street, Perth, which is a proposed third-party digital billboard sign, has been withdrawn by the applicant. 5.2, number 160 160 Lincoln Street, Highgate, proposed single house. Can I have any questions, please? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Through the Mayor to the Manager or Acting Director. Just wondering, in terms of the second consultation letter, is administration confident that the recipients of those would have been aware that they had revised information about the 3 stories as opposed to potentially just receiving it in error?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm confident that the recipients of the letter would understand, I guess, why the second round of consultation was undertaken, and that the letter clearly depicts and explains what the acceptable height is and what was being proposed.
Councillors, questions? Councillor Vatakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things that I just really want to get some understanding on. The retaining of the existing fence, which is solid, just really want to understand whether the city has an ability to be able to insist on that fence being constructed to be consistent with the other fences in the street, in that there is some form of visual permeability added.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I might take that on notice and provide that advice in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Just also with the 2 additional trees being added within the verge area, understanding that they're currently that verge is all hard stand. So really are there any intentions moving forward, not just with the planting of the trees, but the addition of any landscaping or low form of vegetation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, ultimately the provision of the trees in the verge is to provide that amenity and links back to the provision of canopy coverage. The treatment of verge is set out in council policy that sets out what those expectations are. So that would be, or the provision of a verge treatment would be consistent with that policy and would not be appropriately addressed through this planning approval. The purpose of this is simply to provide that additional street tree.
Yeah, I understand what you're meaning. I just noticed that the plans on page 26 did show a green verge, so I'm not too sure whether it was just a bit of plan licence on the architect's point of view, whether they had expressed in any intention to green that verge.
Through Americole, just to clarify, Council's policy on treatment of verge sets out a number of ways that you can deal with that. So that would understandably be consistent with whatever that policy sets out.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, the awning on the shop front, I note that the plans show a new awning, which is significantly less in depth compared to the existing awning. So I'm just wondering whether there was discussion with the applicant about retaining the existing awning, if that's at all possible, or any replacement being consistent with the original in terms of appearance and size, so that appearance of the shop front, which was quite unique on that street, was maintained.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there was no specific discussion, although I will confirm and provide that in the briefing notes around the rationale as to why the canopy is being replaced. Just noting that when the proposal was referred to the city's DRP chair, they were supportive of the approach to retain the shopfront generally, and the upgrades to that development did not flag that as a particular issue, but more than happy to seek some advice as to whether this did come up in discussion with the applicant and their rationale for replacing that canopy.
Thank you. And just one last one. Just I understand that the determination notes are sometimes a standard that's applied, but point number 2 refers to the retaining of verged trees. So does this not need to actually be amended so it actually correctly reflects the matter that we're discussing, which doesn't have any verged trees as part of it? And it also, I suppose, has relevance back to point number 8.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I would agree with that, and that can be addressed.
Councillors, questions? Manager, I just want to ask a question. I note the commentary in the report about the visual privacy from the roof tree terrace setback, reduced setback, and the areas it overlooks not being private areas. I just wondered whether the city had heard from the neighbour. I note that there wasn't an objection, but did they provide support, or have they been in touch with the city to provide any comment?
To you, Mayor Cole, I will confirm that. My understanding is that they had been in contact with the city but did not express an objection or concerns with that in particular. My understanding is that it was more around better understanding the proposal and what it meant for them living next door to the future development. I can, again, confirm that in briefing notes.
Yeah, I guess I'd be interested to have some commentary about whether it's close to private sleeping areas, for example, of the neighbouring house. But if they have not objected, then it should not be my concern. Thank you. Any further questions on this item? Okay, we'll move on. Next item is 5.3, City of Vincent submission on Design WA Stage 2 precinct design. Questions? I had just a comment. I wondered whether it might be useful to summarise the high-level points in the cover letter.
Through you, Americole, that can certainly be done.
Thank you. All right, moving on. 5.4, number 14, View Street, North Perth, proposed change of use from office to office and consulting rooms, medical. Sorry, Councillor Hallett, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor. Do we know if any other similar developments nearby have had cash in lieu waived?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I will confirm nearby, and yeah, I'll provide that in the briefing notes.
Councillors, another question, Councillor Hallett?
And just in terms of the parking in the surrounding area, the data on Woodville suggested that it meets the threshold for parking restrictions, which they don't currently have. Is that being reviewed at all by administration?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that request has been provided to our traffic department, who are considering the request and ultimately that would need to be presented to council with whatever that recommendation was. So that has been provided to the relevant department that will progress to council.
Just a follow-up question on parking. I don't know whether I misread the report, but it talked about the fact that 8 bays are required, 2 are provided, but that there are actually an allocation of 4 tandem bays. Are they only being counted as 2 bays because they're tandem bays?
To you, Mayor Cole, they're being counted as 4 bays on the basis that this strata lot has 2 levels, 2 floors. This proposal applies only to the ground floor. The upper floor is still remaining as an office, as previously approved. When the development was originally approved, it was considered appropriate to have 4 tandem bays to meet the demands of these 2 floors of the strata.
Okay, and just to double check, so the office use is compliant in terms of its parking allocation, the current use? There's no shortfall?
To you, Mayor Cole, yes. At the time of the approval, 2 bays was required for the office use on the first floor and 2 bays required for the ground floor office.
Thank you. Councillors? Okay. The next item we have dealt with, 5.5, so we'll go to 5.6. City of Vincent submission on single residential building reforms, consultation, regulatory impact statement. Any questions? I have a few. Oh no, you go ahead, Councillor Fotakis.
I've only got one, so I just really wanted to, through you, Mayor, see if there's an assessment being done to get an idea of the additional resources, including staff, that would be required in order to meet option 3.
That was pretty much what I was going to ask, flow-on costs and resourcing staffing costs. Welcome, Manager, for what was formerly known as health regulation but is now something including wellbeing, wellness even.
Through you, Macole, that's the financial implications and budget implications is something that would have to be considered in terms of implementing option 3, in particular the mandatory inspections.
It did seem that, was it 4 inspections per build on all residential homes? Is that going to cause the city to require additional team members, like additional FTE?
Through you, Macole, it will be highly likely that it would require additional FTE. It would be expected that that would be recoverable through cost recovery.
That brings me to my next question, which was really about what would be the likely flow-on cost to applicants or developers in taking up option 3. In terms of that, I'm assuming it would be dealt with through their application fees, or would there be a set fee that would be about inspections?
Yeah, through you, Macole, there was a cost-benefit analysis done as part of this consultation regulatory impact statement, which estimates that the average cost would be, not just for inspections, but for the entirety of option 3 would be an additional approximately $1,600 to $2,000 per dwelling per year.
So that might be where the pressure comes in terms of pursuing option 3, I assume, for the development industry. Would there any commentary on whether we think that would hinder the chances of success?
Through you, Macole, I think that the triggers that led to this occurring in terms of the issues that exist with the current building regulatory system and the existence of this consultation regulatory impact statement to start off with identifies that perhaps the benefits of having option 3 or option 2 might actually alleviate some of the existing issues that occur.
Yes, noted. And just to clarify, you're saying that the $1,600 to $2,000 would potentially be full cost recovery So the city wouldn't bear the additional cost.
To you, Americole, I will just have to answer that question in a bit more detail via a briefing note, because that $1,600 to $2,000 is the cost, the entire cost of option 3. It is not just the cost that involves the additional services from the city.
Thank you, Manager. Any further questions? No? Okay, we'll move on to 5.7, Parklet Proposal, 711 Newcastle Street, Leederville. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thanks, through you, Mayor. Just wondering if, beyond the community consultation that's due next year post the pilot of the current liquor licence parklet, whether there's any other, I guess, metrics or evaluation that's being done aside from community consultation in terms of data collection from administration?
Through you, Americole, the city's place managers are continually monitoring the use of the parklets, generally and also specifically the ones that are licensed, so that we understand how they're used. We're also understanding if there's any safety issues that arise from having the liquor licensing on the parklets. So there's a number of metrics that are being considered as to whether the trial is a success or not.
And would that be included in the report along with the community consultation or prior to that?
Through Americole, it would be provided all together.
Questions? Councillor Vatakis.
Through you, Mayor, and apologies if this is a little, I think it's on topic, but it's just use this as an opportunity to get some clarity on the no smoking component within the parklets, and where that sits in terms of vaping as a behaviour on our current city policy. So I just really wanted to use that as an opportunity because I noted it being in Leederville on Sunday there were a couple of people sitting in parklets using vaping.
Through you, Americole, I believe the parklets policy does not allow smoking in parklets. However, I'm not sure if that specifically covers vaping or where that would sit in the city's other regulatory requirements. So I'll check that and provide it in the briefing notes.
Any further questions? Okay. 5.8. Amendment number 5 to Local Planning Scheme number 2, Outcomes of Advertising. This item appeared on the formerly known as late agenda, now called supplementary agenda. It's amazing what a word can do. Any questions? Go ahead.
This was just in relation to, I believe I asked this at the workshop, I just want to get clarification. In relation to lots that are amalgamated, and whether the 2 dwellings per lot provision would apply or whether the, I guess, bonus provisions would apply, in the circumstance where, say, character houses were demolished and then the lot was amalgamated with a lot that retained a character dwelling. So the overall that was, say, 3 ends up being 1, only has 1 character dwelling on it. Which pathway does it go down under the assessment, and is that clear enough under the current wording?
Through Americole, the amalgamation issue is somewhat nuanced to every specific case, and so we've seen that kind of thing happen in the past, and other different ways around provisions, not just this provision, but every provision in every scheme. People will find different ways of doing things. So for that specific one, that issue still will exist, but because of the wording of the proposed modification, where we're including a building of character significance essentially on each lot, it would be remiss of an applicant or a developer to remove those buildings before having an approval that stipulates whether they are significant or not, because we may find that they have removed the significant portion, or they may have kept the significant portion and still want to do the same thing. So, yeah, it would really be up to each specific case and the assessment that we do, but the ability, I guess, the possibility is there.
Whereas under the existing wording, if that was to occur, even if there was, now that the WAPC is subdividing on that basis, but if that was to occur, then ultimately there would be the only pathway would be 2 dwellings per lot, whereas under this current pathway there is potentially some less certainty for as to what the outcome might be in those, if you're amalgamating lots and demolishing on the lot.
Through Mecca. So, yes, currently the clause would be requiring the 2 dwellings per lot, regardless of, as a maximum, regardless of the size of that lot. But the, I guess the offset of that is that there would be no retention of a character dwelling, either incentivised or regulated. So through the proposal, there exists that incentive to build more than 2 dwellings per lot up to the R40 code and within the existing framework. And so in order to get that, you have to retain that character dwelling.
And so just to be completely clear, if you had multiple lots that were amalgamated, the significant portion of each lot would include the lots prior to the amalgamation. So there would need to be a significant portion of the significant portion of the dwelling on each of the, what are they, parent lots? Yeah, that's right. And even if the child lot was an amalgamation. Okay, thank you.
So no, that's not how it's proposed, not each of the lots if you're amalgamating. The way it works is, it's a little complex because it depends on whether it's a strata or a freehold as well. So there are a lot of technicalities, but as for whether it was significant character or not, we can still do that determination based on the buildings that were on each of those lots. But the way that we've worded the proposal to have each building on each lot, that wouldn't be specifically referring to those parent lots which have been amalgamated. But the urban design study would be required to show that you've retained a significant portion of that, whatever was there.
I'm very confused. Can I just give you a scenario and you can tell me what would happen? Say there were 3 lots that all had a pre-1940s home on them. The owner went, before going through an amalgamation process, decided to demolish 2 of the 3 homes, then amalgamate, because we don't have no demolition without DA. So demolished 2 of the 3 homes on the parent lots, then amalgamated the lot and had 1 pre-1940s home. Would they still get the benefit of the full R40 development of the site if they kept that 1 home, which was formerly 3?
Through Mecca, it's not exactly the intent of what we're proposing. So I can have a look. There's obviously going to be like 100 different cases that are very specific, and the proposal that we've had will apply only to 91 dwellings that are in that entire area. So I don't believe there will be many circumstances where that exact situation will actually arise, even if it were possible under the provision to do what you're saying.
But do we need a further point in this scheme amendment that says that where there has been an amalgamation of a series of lots and that character homes or pre-1940s homes have been demolished, this does not apply?
Yeah, I'll have a look and provide that in the briefing notes.
Okay,
That's fine.
thank you.
Yep.
While I'm asking, I was just going to also talk about the fact that the proposed text talks about the fact that there are almost two tests, that it must be pre-1940 and which maintains all character elements of those buildings. So I'm just raising the issue of maintains and the word all character elements of those buildings, because what would happen in a situation where it was a pre-1940s home and some character elements were no longer there but it still had character value? I'm just wondering if the inclusion of the word all could actually be a stumbling block and could be used potentially where there had been minor modifications to the character of the home.
Through Americole, yeah, potentially. It's all character elements that are deemed valuable by the urban design study. That's what we're proposing through this modification. So in that, it would be expected that it wouldn't find those modified elements as valuable as the original elements, and so maybe that's a significant portion of those original elements are maintained.
Well, that's my next question. Should it be potentially, rather than all, should we be saying significant, most, or just delete all, the word all, so that it said, and which maintains character elements of those buildings? I just think all is potentially problematic.
Yeah, it's definitely potential.
Could you consider and perhaps just advise whether it might be more appropriate to use the word significant, most, or delete all in the briefing notes if you've had time to consider it?
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Manager. Moving on then to infrastructure and environment. Item 6.1, response to petition requesting the relocation of parking on Turner Street, Highgate, adjacent Jack Marks Reserve. Councillor Loden.
A couple of questions. First one, is it possible to include a higher res version of the parking restrictions around that area? It may just be my old man eyes again, of course. I could get Councillor Wallace to interpret for me as well, potentially too. Is it a fair assumption that the split between dog park users and streets residents is 22 residents and then the rest are dog users? Or do you have any idea on who those other people might be?
Through Americole, obviously I can't tell for certain, but it does appear that the larger number are the dog walkers. I can't think of any other reason why they'd sign the petition.
One resident via email has requested permit holders and visitors parking only instead. Could you advise how the city would typically address that?
Through Americole, the area is currently, I think, 1 hour parking on weekdays between 8 and 5 and then Saturday mornings. But it's also resident permits only, so we would propose no change to that. That seems to function well in the surrounding streets, so we wouldn't propose any change to that in relation to this petition.
The resident also raised a concern about trees from Jack Marks Reserve dropping branches which would potentially hit the trees. Is that a... oh God, I'm not doing well today. Hit the cars.
I think we're actually interpreting as you go, and we're sensing what you mean.
It's my old man ears as well, I think, possibly. Potentially hitting the cars. Is that an issue?
Through Americole, we don't think so. I've passed that to the parks manager who's looking into it, but his initial assessment was that wasn't an issue, or certainly no more than anywhere else.
Are you able to provide something in the briefing notes just to confirm that?
Yeah, through Americole, of course we can, yeah, that's no problem.
And a separate one, just curious to know if this is a high traffic volume street or is it relatively low number of cars travelling down the street? The reason why I'm asking is you could potentially create a zag in the street to slow traffic down a bit.
Through Americole, I'll take that question on notice and I'll check what data we've got if we put classifiers there in the last few years.
Thank you.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Americole, just you may need to take this question on notice. I'm just wondering if you can tell me what the size of Jack Mark's reserve is in the POS strategy and what radius that is anticipated that it would serve?
Through you, Nicole, I think I will need to take that.
Well, I'm just
that
thinking,
notice.
Councillor Gondaszewski and I looked at this when we were looking at the size of Haynes Reserve, and I think we were saying it was about 0.6 hectares from memory. Susan, Councillor Gondaszewski's looking it up for you. Councillor Castle will come back to you on that. Yes, go ahead.
Just if I could get just some commentary. This appeared from the report that there was some possible safety merits for each, for both the status quo and the new option. If I could get some commentary on in relation to safety of, pitting one of the options against each other, if that would be really great.
Yes, through you, Americole. We've listed the advantages, I think, on page 22. Is that the correct number? So one of the advantages, or one of the safety improvements, is that when people would reverse out of their driveways across their crossovers, there wouldn't be cars parked either side, so the line of sight would be better, so that would be safer for them reversing out. The other safety improvement is if you are visiting the park and you are wishing to enter the park, you don't have to cross a road if the cars are parked on that side. So there are some safety improvements. The disbenefit would be when you're swinging out of your drive, this turning circle is more restricted, so you just have to be careful and maybe make a few extra manoeuvres.
Is it possible to get some confirmation, whether through swept path diagrams or otherwise, that the street is of an appropriate width for the reversing out to occur safely or in accordance with standards?
Yeah, through my call, I'll take that on notice and we'll put some information in the briefing notes.
And for Councillor Castle, Jack Mark's reserve is 0.67, very nicely done, Americole, of a hectare, and is a local open space with a catchment of approximately 400 metres or about a 5-minute walk. My last question related to the timing of consultation. Given the small number of residents that is proposed to be consulted with and the Christmas gap, etc., and that I think this is obviously something that is, from a neighbourhood perspective, maybe worth resolving early, if possible. I'm just wondering if it's possible to have best efforts at undertaking the consultation between now and the meeting.
Yes, through you, Americole. I did discuss that with the team today. They feel they are sort of fully engaged on other things and projects, and so they thought that was unlikely. The other thing is that would have to be a sort of a door-knocking exercise. We can't guarantee everyone would be in, so we prefer to be able to drop something and receive something back in writing to be sure that all residents have had their opportunity to speak.
And is the consultation intended on being residents or residents and owners?
It would be, through my call, it would be residents and owners as well. I mean, we would need a little bit of time to prepare a plan of what the planning change would actually look like. We've not done that yet, and do some technical work on site, and we deliver that with a letter to every single house in Turner Street and right to the owners as well.
I just would also welcome an estimation of the cost in advance of consultation. I'm assume that it's not going to be overly expensive if it's just line marking, but I do think that would inform council's decision on whether to actually consult, whether it's, has a pricey tag attached. Seems unlikely, but I think it would be good to know in advance if possible.
Through you, Americole, the manager of engineers estimated about $2,000. You're right, it would be line marking and moving the signs to the other side of the road, so about $2,000.
Okay, that's great. If that could be added to the report, that'd be appreciated. Thank you. And would it be difficult to show a plan that would mark up the existing bays and also mark up the alternate on the other side? And I take Councillor Loden's point about a ZAG. It could then have some parking on either side potentially, without wanting to overcomplicate the matters too much. Yes, you could do.
Yeah, so through you, Americole, that plan is in the process of being prepared, so that isn't a problem.
So that would be available before next Tuesday?
Yes, it would.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on this item? Councillor Fotakis?
It's just whether the officer's report can be just, I suppose, one point that I noted with the petition with 109 signatures. I did note that 13 of those signatures did come from 2 people. So whether just gets updated to reflect the fact that the 109 signatures weren't from 109 individuals, but also to check on the 22 signatures that were from residents surrounding that. Again, ensuring how many of those weren't multiple signatures as well.
Through Mecca, yeah, we provided the petition. Obviously, you picked up from the petition in the confidential attachments, but we can do a count and see what the actual number is if there's a discrepancy.
Councillors, any further questions? Thank you. Moving on then to item 6.2, making the Parking and Parking Facilities Amendment Local Law 2019. Any questions? Okay. 6.3, City Homelessness Framework Committee Action Plan Update. Thank you. 6.4, Tree Removal Requests. Okay, Community and Business Services items. 7.1, Lease of Beatty Park Leisure Centre Cafe to Hospitality Service Providers Proprietary Limited. Councillor Gondaszewski.
Just a question in relation to the terms of the lease. I believe that the operational or organisational review talked about having private operators as being a positive, and that minimum opening hours and menu items could be addressed through lease terms. I note in the documentation that was provided in the recommendation that it talked about the minimum opening hours, but it hasn't made any commentary in relation to the menu items, and just regarding what discussions have been had to date in relation to that, and what, if anything, is intended on being put into the lease.
Yes, through Americole. We have discussed that with the operator, and they've gone through the various healthy options that they plan to provide and that they do provide in their other venues. We haven't proposed anything in the lease agreement at the moment, but that's something in the terms. But that is something we can look at this week. The operator has said that they would be willing to. They're going to do that anyway, so it would be quite straightforward for us to include that between now and the briefing. So we'll put that in the briefing notes.
Councillor Loden.
I just wanted to clarify on the lease terms. It's 2 times a second 5 years. Is that at the lessee's discretion or our discretion?
Yes, through Americole, that would be at the lessee's discretion.
Just drawing comparison between the other lease, which is WA Swimming, this one provides for 3 months' notice, whilst the other one provides for 6. I was just wondering why there was a difference.
Through you, Americole, Swimming WA requested 6 months' notice, and we gave them a shorter lease term to align with the Beatty Park Options project. So we believe that 6 months was reasonable in those circumstances because the lease term was only 1.5 years. But usually 3 months is the normal notice period, which is why this is used for the cafe lease.
And just not an easy question to answer, but what would be the associated depreciation of the fixtures and fittings and structure if we were to assume that we didn't have this cafe at all on the asset on an annual basis?
Yes, through Americole, we can do some numbers and get back. We have looked at the structures in there in quite a lot of detail as part of this, so we should be able to provide those figures.
I guess my interest there is to understand, is the lease cost covering, or would this be, if we better off having a hole in the sky with a nice little park or something, some trees?
Yes, we can. We've already done that analysis, so we'll provide that in the briefing notes.
Councillors, just in relation to the lease, I did want to clarify why the configuration of 3 + 5 + 5 had been chosen. Is there any reason why it would start with a smaller period and then go into an additional 10 years at their option?
Yes, through Americole, that was their proposed terms.
And are there any concerns with going beyond a 10-year leasing time frame with an operator at their discretion?
Through Americole, we weren't concerned on the basis that we would have the market rent review at the end of each term. So on that basis, this is profitable for the city, so we considered it would be a benefit, provided we were getting market rate. We thought this was a good outcome over the longer term.
So, for example, if there's a scenario after the 3-year period that there were constant complaints about the cafe, I don't wish to. This is just a scenario, not any comment on the operator, who I have no knowledge of. Would there be any ability to break the lease if that became sort of that the customer service or that the standard of food quality was poor and there were many complaints? What would the city be able to do?
Yes, through Mecca, we would rely on the lease terms in order to manage the operation to ensure that the lessee is operating in an appropriate way. I would hope and I would expect that the operator would operate in a manner that would be good for their business. I don't think they would survive if they were at a certain extreme end of that scale. And obviously they would need to comply with the lease terms, so that would be how we would hold them accountable for delivering an appropriate level of service for the city.
Okay, thank you. Just also the lease term talks about the city providing the cafe equipment. Is that standard in these circumstances? And what's, in terms of the types of equipment, fridges, coffee machines, has that sort of been costed in terms of lifespan of equipment and the cost to the city in keeping that equipment being our responsibility to ensure that that's provided, and if it's no longer functional, that we have to replace it?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that's a very good question, and it's a question that we've been asking and looking into. We did contact a number of other leisure centres throughout Perth run by local governments that have this same arrangement, and they all of them provide those facilities and renew those facilities at end of life. So none of those cafe operators are paying for those costs. We did discuss this with this potential lessee, and they weren't supportive of that, given the other lease they have at Craigie Leisure Centre and the other arrangements they have. We have looked at the cost of replacing the oven and the fixtures, etc., that sit inside the cafe area, and those costs will be covered by, will be more than covered by this. So I think as part of the information that Councillor Loden requested, we'll put all those figures in, and you can understand the depreciation costs and the renewal costs associated with this arrangement.
So would it include things like a coffee machine? Just of interest, would it be possible to get a bit of a breakdown of the larger pieces of equipment that this would... Because, I don't know any cafe that moves into a building and has a coffee machine and oven, etc. supplied. It does seem like an unusual commercial arrangement. Is that because we're local government? Just, making sure that we're not entering into a poor deal here for the city?
Yes, Mayor Cole, that's exactly the question that we asked. It isn't because... I don't think it's just because we're local government. It's partly because of the nature of the facility. It's not a standalone building, but we'll provide a breakdown of all those costs so we can all have those in front of us before considering this further.
Thank you. I also just wanted to ask, in terms of the setup period, will there still be a service provided to customers, or would there be a period where there was no cafe available?
Through Mayor Cole, are you referring to the initial period from the 1st of March? Yes, there will be a cafe operating during that period, yes.
And this is a question that has sensitivities attached, and it might be better answered in briefing notes because I'm not quite sure if this is being discussed, etc. But I just would like to know what would be the arrangements for the existing staff that are running the cafe that are city employees.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I will put that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Hallett?
Just a couple, and happy for this all to be in the briefing notes. Just wondering if we've got any ability to ensure that the applicants join the Responsible Cafe program.
Yes, through Americole. I'm not certain of that, so I'll put that in the briefing notes. We'll ask the supplier, and we potentially can put it in the lease terms.
And also just whether we've already got any vending machines within Beatty Park, and what ones are currently located at Craigie Leisure Centre, and whether there's any anticipation that we might have any added to Beatty Park.
Yes, through
and what they'd
Americole.
be.
I'll take that notice as well.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay. Next item is 7.2, review of draft annual report 2018-19. Councillor Loden.
Just wanted to confirm my understanding. In the Sustainable Environment Strategy, we said we were going to include reporting in our annual report, but I think that was scheduled for next year's annual report. Is that correct?
Through your Americole, yes, the new SCS is still in its infancy, but we are developing KPIs for across the city, which will be able to hopefully provide council over the next couple of months, which will include some of those key SCS KPIs related to carbon emissions.
Any further questions on the draft annual report? Okay. 7.3, request for waiver of fees, Leaderville Oval, AFLW. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a question. Am I reading correctly that in our lease, so the bottom of page 506, in our lease, that somehow it includes a provision that the higher fees for Leaderville Oval for any event are offset against the outgoings of the two football clubs? Is that correct?
Through Americole, essentially, I think it's up to a maximum of $15,000. Oh, there's no cap. There you go. No cap. So, yes.
And the city's responsible for the turf maintenance at Leaderville Oval in its entirety, is that correct?
Through Mecca, no, the city contributes 1/3 of the turf maintenance, and the clubs contribute 1/3 each.
And is there any restriction on our ability to hire Leaderville Oval at any time during the year that's not football season?
Through Mecca, I'm not aware that there's any restriction on the city's ability to hire that space, or anyone's ability to hire that space, provided that it's available and it's not booked out for typical sporting use.
So in the event, for example, that in the non-football season it was to become a live music festival venue, and we had, say, 10 weekends at a charge of $20,000 per weekend, does the fact that their variable outgoings wouldn't likely exceed $200,000, does that mean that would be offset against... Is that entirely to the benefit of the clubs and $0 to the benefit of the city?
Through Mayor Cole, my understanding is once the variable outgoings are paid for, then it would become the city's revenue.
Okay, and the turf maintenance is part of the variable outgoings, is that correct?
Yes, through... Oh, no, very good question.
Through you, Mecca, we are recouping it through the variable outgoings, but it's apportioned a third each, and that's what the lease... We recently varied the lease, I think, within the last year. It went to council, and we varied it so it's clear that it's a third each, and so it's not actually part of the variable outgoings. So they'd always pay a third each, basically, no matter what the revenue from the state, the oval hire was.
So if... And it doesn't directly relate to what's here, but it's on the agenda, so I'll ask the question. So in the event that there was, let's make it easy, $9,000 of revenue from an event, and there was $9,000 worth of turf maintenance that was required thereafter, are you saying that
there would be $4,500 allocated to each football club, which means they each had $1,500 in reserve, and the city would have to contribute $3,000 towards turf maintenance, because that $9,000 is to their benefit, offset against their variable outgoings, and the turf maintenance is not variable outgoings. Is that correct?
Through Americole, so basically, once the variable outgoings, which doesn't include turf maintenance, are covered, the revenue comes to the city. If we receive $9,000 for an event, it'll discount the variable outgoings. It won't discount the turf maintenance. The city, the club, and the clubs will pay a third each for that. So it really all depends on how much the variable outgoings are in total, excluding the turf maintenance. But I can see a scenario where it doesn't cover all the variable outgoings, so all of that benefit goes to the clubs, and yet the city is paying a third of the turf maintenance that's required. But in essence, the turf maintenance contract that we have is a contract to deal with the football season. It's not a contract to deal with repairing the turf after an event. So if there was an issue with an event causing damage to the turf, we would deal with that separately, and I'd have to look into the lease, but potentially we would deal with that through the actual variable outgoings as opposed to the turf maintenance contract, because that turf maintenance contract is just about making sure that the ground is appropriate for football, not repairing damage caused by an event. Typically that would be covered by a bond or some other arrangement. So,
but I guess there's no benefit to the city financially from the event fees associated with Leederville Oval 365 days a year, unless the total value of the income of that fee is greater than the variable outgoings of the two football clubs. There's no way the city has any financial benefit of leasing its premises on a temporary basis because of the nature of the lease with the football clubs. Is that correct?
Yes, through Mecca, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarity, the request has come from the Football Commission. My understanding is the AFLW is run by the Can I just get some clarity as to whose event it actually is, and whether the event is the WA Football Commission or the AFL, and what role the Football Commission actually has in the event itself that's proposed?
Yes, through Americole, AFL fixtures and games played in Western Australia are managed by the Football Commission, because any AFL games in WA, whether they're waffle games, AFLW games, AFL games, it all go through the Football Commission. So it's the Football Commission's event.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that question of costs, so do you have an idea of how much impact this event would have on the turf, and therefore what if this event happens versus if it doesn't happen? Is there a cost differential? Like, do we have to spend more money maintaining the turf as a result of that? And if so, how much?
Yes, through Americole, I don't have a cost, but in essence, the Football Commission have advised that they'll be paying for those costs. They'll be paying for the costs associated with preparing the surface for the AFLW game and for any maintenance that's required after that.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay. Next item, 7.4, investment report as at 31st of October 2019. Questions on the investment report? Okay. Item 7.5, financial statements as at 31st of October 2019. 7.6, November 2019 budget review, including carry forwards. I did have a question on this one in relation to Banks Reserve Phase 1, $760,000. Has there been any consideration as to whether this could potentially be funded over this and next financial year, given that we're not yet going through the tendering process? And I'm not quite sure how long this will take to construct post-tender.
Yes, so through you, Americole, the money is in this year's budget, and some of that money was carry forward from last year, and the report deals with that. We are currently out to tender, and we hope to award the contract over the Christmas period. That's one of the requests for delegation to the CEO over the Christmas break, which you'll see in a later report. If we're able to award a contract quickly, we'll be able to construct this year, but if it's delayed, then there is a chance it'll run into next financial year.
Isn't it likely to cost more than $500,000?
Through you, Mecca, we don't think so at this stage, but until we get the tenders back, we won't know for sure, but we don't think so.
But clarify what amount is in the budget for this project for the active zone that's currently out for tender.
Through you, Mecca, perhaps I'll take it on notice, but my understanding is that the active zone is 500 and the other money's for some other things that have been done down at Banks Reserve. But I can take that on notice and check.
Thank you. No other questions? 7.7 authorisation of expenditure for 22nd October to 18th of November 2019. Chief Executive Officer items 8.1 DSR lease of 246 Vincent Street, Leadville to Minister for Works, Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries. Questions? I do have some questions. I just wanted to ask in relation to the payment of the 3 annual instalments, whether we would pay those instalments regardless of whether a program of works has been provided by the department.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the proposal is that we'd either pay $0.53 million in each of the first 3 financial years of the lease, or when they put in their approved schedule of works, we would then pay it in accordance with that schedule. So they would have those 2 options.
So if they put their approved schedule of works to us next financial year, then we would pay it all in one go?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that wasn't the intention. The intention was that the approved schedule of works would be over 3 financial years. So maybe we'd pay $0.8 million the first year, then $0.6 million, and then the remainder in the third year. So it still has to be over a 3-year period. So that allows us to budget it over 3 years.
Is there any way we could tighten that up to actually say that a maximum of $0.53 million will be paid over each of the 3 years, rather than leaving it loose and difficult to budget depending on at any time they may provide us with their approved schedule and program of works?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we thought potentially they may want to spend more than $0.53 million in one financial year, which is why we wanted some flexibility, but we could put a cap in if that's more appropriate.
Well, I'm probably more concerned with the city having surety about what our financial obligation would be, so my preference would be to get some advice on whether that might be possible. Also, just in relation to 3.6 installation of solar panels, I just wanted to inquire as to whether there'd been any further looking into the models under which those solar panels could be provided, the financial models.
Through you, Mecca, we'll make sure we provide some more information in the briefing notes. I can't remember if we've addressed that further.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Toppelberg? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll come to you next, Councillor Smith.
Just a quick one. Is it, and forgive me if it is explicit in the report and I've missed it, but do we own the fit out at the conclusion of the lease?
Through you, Mecca, yes, we would.
Just referring to the lease terms, I notice in the one of the attachments from the 21st of June, they had a break of lease clause for it was 5 years where they could break the lease in 3 years. Do we have any break of lease in the new 10-year lease?
Through you, Mecca, no. So their original proposal was for a 5-year lease with a 3-year break clause, which effectively meant that the lease was only for a 3-year term, because after 3 years there's no further certainty. They could terminate the lease at their discretion. So we didn't think that was in our interest to have that type of clause. So what we're looking for is a longer term lease, and that's why there's no break clause proposed in the current proposal.
Were there other questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just with regards to the replacement of the LED lights, just when that would be proposed to occur, and if there's any indication with the conversations that have been with the state government, whether there's an LED light rebate scheme on the horizon, the same as currently New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia have LED rebate programs, which I thought might be advantageous for us to bear in mind if that was being considered at a WA level.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm not aware of that, and we'll have a look into that and provide some advice in the briefing notes. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay, 8.2, appointment of elected member to the Metropolitan Regional Road Subgroup, Central. Is anyone interested? Oh, put your hand back down again. You wish to ask a question? Okay.
I was just hoping for some additional guidance on what things would be considered by this group as what would be an example of something that we would consider within the city.
Through you, Mecca. If I can take that on notice, what we'll do is issue some information so all elected members know what's required before you make a decision to nominate.
Perhaps I could turn to Councillor Hallett. Is this the group that you've been sitting on, Councillor Hallett?
No.
Oh,
or
okay.
if I am, we've never met.
Oh. Well, I thought you were on some kind of group like this. Is that... Okay, well, regardless, there has been potentially... Well, there might be very little involved. It might just be your name in a council report. All right. Are there any council members that are interested? Yes, Councillor Hallett's interested. Anyone... You don't have to declare tonight. So. Perhaps you could email me and let me know in advance that noted that we have interest from Councillor Hallett and a potential interest from Councillor Loden, probably pending a bit more information about what actually happens at this group. Thank you. Okay. No further questions? Okay. 8.3, Council Recess Period 2019-20, Delegated Authority to the Chief Executive Officer. Any questions? I just want to clarify with the tendering, because it's noted that there are two tenders, and the one I think that would probably be of interest would be the active zone at Banks Reserve. So the way that the report is written, it's basically saying that the same process would occur in that you'd be given 3 days notification with the report. So that would be made publicly available to the council members and published before a decision would be made. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Just confirming that the call-in is not open to debate or discussion if one elected member says that they want it to come to council under the way that this proposed decision is written. That means it comes to council. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct.
No email debate. Okay. No further questions? Okay. 8.4, acquisition of the right-of-way known as Lot 305, bounded by Charles Walcott and Hilda Streets, North Perth, as Crown land, investing in the city as a public right-of-way. Any questions on this one? Councillor Wallace?
Through you, Mecca, are we currently responsible for maintenance of this right-of-way? Or are we assuming responsibility for maintenance of it? Got you stumped.
The question of the night goes to Councillor Wallace.
Through you, Mecca, I'll actually just take it on notice because I just want to double check if it's a privately owned right-of-way and where the current, who owns it, just to be sure. And we'll confirm in the briefing notes, sorry.
Thanks. Could you update any financial implications accordingly as well?
Any further questions? Okay. Next question. Item. Leederville Gardens Incorporated. Questions, Councillor Loden.
So this is a separate question. What happened to WA swimming? Has that moved somewhere in the agenda?
Well, on my agenda, it's 8.8.
Because I thought it was 8.3.
It was 8.3 in the supplementary.
Through you, Mayor Cole, when we originally published the agenda, it was included in the agenda published on Wednesday, and then we had to withdraw one of the items, and somehow it was missed when it was rebuilt and published. So that's why we put that item in the supplementary agenda, and the numbering's changed. So sorry for any confusion about that.
So is it number? What's the number? Is it 8? Is swimming WA 8.8?
8.8. That's correct.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we are at 8.5, which is Leederville Gardens. Any questions on this? I have a question. I just want to... I feel like I need to ask questions via scenario tonight, just to kind of get across this. So I'm just trying to understand what the difference is to the current situation. And given that there is, on page 661 of the agenda, it aligns all of the different... it outlines all of the different circumstances. I'm in the wrong one. Sorry, I'm in supplementary items as opposed to the standard agenda. Okay. I'm having technical problems again. Okay, so going from memory, on page 661, which I cannot read, it talks about all of the different circumstances that the surplus could go towards, including replacement of association assets, planned maintenance of association assets, the purchase or construction of new assets for the association, the repurchase of resident leases, reserves arising out of capital revaluation, the deferred management fund, any amount which, in the opinion of the board, should be retained for orderly operation and enhancement of the village. Would there ever be a situation in which there would be any surplus left going into the trust? Because I guess the question is, particularly with clause 4 of the definition of accumulated operating surplus, that is incredibly broad. And is this, if we are just basically saying that we don't wish any further funds to go into the trust, that's one issue, but I'm just trying to ascertain whether this effectively is the same thing.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the report, we don't expect the report to have any practical implication in terms of the flow of funds to the trust. The report relates largely to the auditors of Leederville Gardens wanting greater clarity around some of the definitions, and we are comfortable with the proposed changes. We don't think they'll have a practical impact, but it'll give Leederville Gardens auditors a greater level of comfort around how those purposes are specified within their constitution.
But is the wording overly broad, or is this quite standard? I'm talking in particular about clause 4, any amount which in the opinion of the board should be retained for the orderly operation and enhancement of the village. For example, could the board set up a asset sustainability reserve in the same way that we have at the City of Vincent and simply put all surplus into an asset reserve? Because I just guess I'm trying to have the conversation about, is this actually the end of the charitable trust receiving funds by virtue of having a very broad definition, or is it the case that there will be no practical impact?
Through you, Mayor Cole, this will provide greater clarity to the board about its ability to use the funds generated for normal renewal of their existing assets. It wouldn't be to create a pool of assets to invest in new large-scale assets.
Or could they create their own trust for asset sustainability, for example, and then potentially put all of the surplus into that reserve rather than coming back into the trust?
Through your Americole, that's not our interpretation of what's being proposed.
Have we had any legal advice on what that would mean moving forward in terms of the way the board could use the surplus in relation to Clause 4?
Through your Americole, no, we haven't sought external legal advice on that.
Well, I don't wish to. I know it's costly. I'm not going to request it, but I just wanted to flag that I'd probably like a little bit more clarification in the briefing notes about whether this could simply be put into a reserve and whether it's likely to have an impact on the trust with any operating surplus coming in.
Through your Americole, we can provide that clarity in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just two questions. One in relation to the base increasing from 500,000 to $1 million. If I've missed it, I'm sorry, but just the rationale for that change. And then also, if we're changing the way or the purpose for which the funds that are in the trust can be used, does this just impact on funds that are placed into that trust going forwards, or does this then impact the entire existing trust amount?
Through your Americole, to respond to the second question first, it wouldn't be retrospective. And I'll have to provide advice on the rationale for the move from 500,000 to 1 million in the briefing notes.
Councillors? Okay. 8.6, report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 26th of November 2019. Any questions? Councillor Loden?
Just a question around our chair is currently is now an independent member, and our meeting procedures require that the chair moves the item, but obviously he's not here. How do we address that?
Through you, Americole.
Sorry.
I was going to say, my understanding of the meeting procedures was if the chair's not present, then another member of the Audit Committee can move it. So Councillor Toppelberg, as the Deputy Chair, could move the item.
Good question. Any other questions on the Audit Committee minutes? Okay. 8.7, information bulletin. Councillor Hallett.
Just in relation to the street tree removal requests, the first one on Alma Road, North Perth, there was a request to remove a jacaranda and replace it with the London plane tree. It was replaced with a jacaranda, and just wondering what the tree matrix might have suggested in terms of a native alternative.
Through Mecca, I'll take that question on notice.
Any further questions on the info bulletin? Councillor Gonchevsky.
Oh, this is just one more about that little bulwa at the SAT. I believe there's a mediation that's occurred, and if we could get an update on what the next steps are.
Through you, Americole, I understand that the city has gone through the mediation process, and then the applicant withdrew their SAT application. As for where we're currently at, I will just take it on notice. So I just want to clarify exactly what the next steps are, so provide that in the briefing notes.
Any further questions? Councillor Vatakis.
Just want to let the other members know that there will be a late edition of the Safer Vincent minutes from September that became available on Friday for review, so they'll be coming through as part of next week.
Councillor Hallett, did you have another question?
Yeah, just regarding the Register of Notices of Motion progress report. One of them is the EOI for events in North Perth Common, and just wondering if we could get an update on that.
Yes, through Americole, I won't. I'll provide that in the briefing notes. I know some things, but I don't know everything, so do that next week.
It is going quite well, is my understanding, and apparently the children's market on Sunday, yes, is very well subscribed and will be lovely, so I encourage you all to come along. But there's lots of, and also the House Vinyasana has sold out, apparently. Yep. Anyway, thank you, Director. We look forward to the full update. Any further questions on Info Bulletin? Okay. 8.8, lease of portion of grandstand, mezzanine, aerobics room and old administration offices at Beatty Park Leisure Centre, WA Swimming Association Incorporated. Councillor Gondaszewski.
There was an item in the recommendation relating to noting the... I'm sorry, I'm trying to switch to the supplementary agenda. Noting, I think, the contribution of the organisation and also something about the Beatty Park options project. And just wondering in relation why that was included, or the rationale for that being included.
Through you, Americole, WA Swimming's been a long-standing tenant at Beatty Park, and we greatly value their association with Beatty Park and the history attached to that. They were seeking a longer-term lease. We are proposing to Council a shorter-term lease, given that we're currently in the middle of a project to determine what the long-term future could be for the grandstand asset, and we can't predict what the outcome of that could be at this stage. We would certainly be willing and open to retaining WA Swimming long term, but there may be a case that there'll be some budget items related to either essential maintenance around the grandstand, whether it's structural works, some sort of capital works, electrical upgrades, for instance, which could involve some level of disruptions to the tenant. We thought we should be open and honest about that possibility with them, and therefore not agree to a long-term lease, but we're recommending 18 months, and then within the next 12 months, if Council makes a determination about the timing or size or implications of potential capital works at Beatty Park, then we could reconsider whether that was going to impact WA Swimming, and if it wasn't, then we could come back to Council with a longer term lease proposal to add on to that, what we're currently suggesting of 18 months.
Do you consider that item 2 in any way binds the City in relation to the consideration of another item, noting that we tend to have a history of trying not to put things in recommendations that then are broader than the issue in question?
Through you, Americole, part of the implication of that would be that it's only about 20 staff members in WA Swimming, and given our long-standing relationship with them, if there were options or we needed to do some capital works in different portions of the building or in Beatty Park, then we would, on our best endeavours basis, try to accommodate them either at Beatty Park or elsewhere. I should note that the WA Swimming does have another option or potential place to relocate. We just wouldn't want them to be without a home or an office, and we would work to make sure there was no disruption to that.
Councillor Loden.
Given we've got the 6-month termination clause, and there might be a risk that our options report process takes longer than expected, what would be the risk of doing a 3-year lease and then, if we needed them to be out sooner, give them the 6-month termination notice?
Through you, Americole, my view would be relatively low risk. Alternatively, though, within the next 6 months, if Council has greater confidence about what may occur at Beatty Park in terms of capital works, given our budget situation or potential opportunities, then within the next 6 months, and what we may be seeking from Council or recommending to Council in terms of budget items, in terms of capital works next financial year, then it wouldn't be a difficult exercise at all to add an extra, or recommend to council adding an extra 18 months onto this current lease.
And that doesn't result in a significant administrative burden for the city?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no. It would be administrative burden to the manager to my left. It would be a manageable one, given how competent she is.
Is it a bad look, though, for the city to terminate a lease? I mean, I'd probably rather just give that and then not start terminating leases when, we start to... Yeah, anyway, just... Is it a bad look? That's sort of how I started it. Yes, it is a question, and you can all ponder it before next Tuesday. Any further questions? No? Okay, that means that we are concluding our meeting at 7:48 p.m. Thank you very much to those who have joined the live stream.